Queen Verithea pressed her palms against the cold metal of the viewing window, her reflection ghost-like against the stars. Another explosion lit up the darkness as the Ravagers tore through her remaining fleet like paper. The orange flames bloomed and died in seconds, taking with them 3,000 of her finest warriors. She had ruled the Xelian Empire for 20 years, through prosperity and minor conflicts, but nothing had prepared her for this. The Ravagers weren't just conquering her territory, they were devouring it completely. Entire planets stripped bare, their populations either dead or worse, absorbed into the enemy's growing mass. Behind her, the War Council had devolved into chaos. General Thane slammed his fist on the holographic display, his voice rising above the others. "We must retreat to the inner systems and make our stand at the capital." "With what ships?" Admiral Kess shot back, her usually perfect uniform, disheveled from sleepless nights. "We've lost 70% of our fleet in 3 weeks. At this rate, we'll have nothing left to defend the homeworld." The arguing continued, the same circular discussions they'd been having for days. Honor demanded they fight using traditional tactics. Protocol required formal battle formations and ceremonial challenges before engagement. The ancient ways of warfare that had served the Xelian Empire for 1,000 years. But the Ravagers didn't care about honor. They attacked without warning, targeted civilian populations, and used weapons that violated every galactic convention. When Xelian ships arranged themselves in proper battle lines, the enemy simply ignored their formations and struck wherever they were weakest. Verithea turned from the window, studying the faces of her advisors. These people had served her faithfully, followed her commands without question, and now she could see the fear in their eyes. They were losing, and everyone knew it. Commander Kyle stood apart from the arguing group, his scarred face thoughtful. He'd been with her the longest, had fought in the border skirmishes with the Crimson Republic and the mining disputes in the Outer Rim. If anyone understood the true situation, it was him. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, stepping closer. "Perhaps it is time to consider alternative options." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what he meant, though no one wanted to say it out loud. The humans. Those chaotic, unpredictable warriors that the civilized galaxy had always viewed with suspicion and barely concealed disgust. "You cannot be serious," General Thane sputtered. "They're barbarians, warmongers who settle disputes with violence instead of diplomacy." "Maybe that's exactly what we need," Kyle replied. "The Ravagers understand only one language, violence. Our diplomatic protocols mean nothing to an enemy that consumes entire worlds." Verithea had met humans before, at galactic council meetings and trade negotiations. They were smaller than most species, lacking the natural armor or energy manipulation, abilities that other races possessed. But there was something unsettling about them, an intensity that made other delegates uncomfortable. The galactic community had spent decades trying to contain human expansion, not through military force, but through bureaucracy and social pressure. Humans were too aggressive, too willing to fight, too quick to abandon diplomatic solutions. They were barely a century into space travel, newcomers who didn't understand how civilized species conducted themselves, but they won their wars. "Admiral," Kess pulled up intelligence reports on her personal display. "The humans have been watching this conflict. Their scout ships have been detected in several systems, always just outside engagement range." "Probably waiting to pick over the remains," muttered another advisor. "Or studying the enemy," Verithea said slowly. "The humans are many things, but they're not stupid." She thought about the human ambassador she'd met last year, a woman named Ambassador Park, who had spoken with quiet confidence about her species' military capabilities. At the time, Verithea had dismissed it as typical human boasting. Now she wondered if it had been a warning. The tactical display updated with new information. 2 more systems had gone dark, their communications cutting off mid-transmission. At this rate, the Ravagers would reach the Xelian homeworld within days, not weeks. "Your Majesty," Kyle said again, his voice gentle but insistent. "We're running out of time and options." Verithea closed her eyes, feeling the weight of billions of lives on her shoulders. Her pride rebelled at the thought of asking those upstart humans for help. But her duty as queen demanded she do whatever was necessary to save her people, even if it meant swallowing that pride. The secure communications chamber felt smaller than usual as Queen Virathea sealed the door behind her. The room was designed for the most sensitive diplomatic correspondence, its walls lined with quantum scramblers that made interception impossible. She had used this chamber to coordinate with allied fleets, negotiate trade agreements, and once to declare war on the Crimson Republic, but never to beg for help from humans. Her hands shook as she activated the encryption protocols. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was using Xelian coordinates that her intelligence services had spent years gathering in secret. Information about human fleet movements, hidden bases, and military capabilities that the Galactic Council would have considered an act of war if discovered. Now she was freely giving it away. The message screen glowed softly in the dim light, cursor blinking as she struggled to find the right words. How do you ask for help from a species your people had always looked down upon? How do you admit that your 1,000-year empire was crumbling against an enemy you couldn't understand? She started typing, deleted everything, then started again. The formal diplomatic language felt wrong, too stiff and proud for what she was actually doing. Finally, she settled on something direct and honest. To the Human Military Command, the Xelian Empire requests immediate military assistance against the Ravager invasion. In exchange, we offer unrestricted access to our technological archives, unlimited resource allocation, and full territorial cooperation. Our situation is desperate. Time is critical. Then came the hardest part, attaching the classified files, fleet positions, defensive capabilities, population centers, everything the humans would need to know to help effectively. Information that could also be used to conquer her empire if they chose to betray her trust. Her finger hovered over the send button for long minutes. Once this message left, there would be no taking it back. The proud Xelian Empire would officially be asking for salvation from the galaxy's newest and most chaotic species. The door chimed softly, an urgent message from the bridge. Another system had fallen. The Ravagers were accelerating their advance, consuming resources at an unprecedented rate. Soon they would have enough biomass to create ships faster than any conventional fleet could destroy them. She pressed send. The quantum transmission burst, lasted only microseconds. But Virathea felt like she could track its journey across the galaxy, past Xelian outposts through neutral space, finally reaching the blue-green world that had produced the humans. Earth, a planet that most galactic citizens considered barely civilized. Now she waited. The response time would tell her everything she needed to know about human efficiency. Diplomatic messages typically took days to process through proper channels, committees and political review. Military communications were faster, but even they required approval from multiple authority levels. She tried to work on other matters, reviewing evacuation protocols and refugee ship assignments. But her eyes kept drifting back to the communication console, watching for the telltale flicker that would indicate an incoming transmission. 3 hours passed, then 4. Virathea began to worry that the humans hadn't received the message, or worse, that they had decided to ignore it. Perhaps they were content to let the galaxy's established powers destroy each other, leaving them to inherit whatever remained. Then the console chimed. The message was brief, so short it barely qualified as a response. No diplomatic pleasantries, no negotiation of terms, no requests for additional information. Just 3 words from someone identified as Admiral Park. "We are coming." Virathea stared at the screen, reading those 3 words over and over. The message had bypassed every normal communication protocol. No political approval, no committee review, no lengthy discussion of terms and conditions. Someone in the human military had simply decided to help and acted on that decision. The timestamp showed the message had been sent within 2 hours of receiving her plea. Impossibly fast for any military organization she knew of. Either the humans had been prepared for this exact scenario, or they possessed a command structure that could make major decisions with frightening speed. She felt a mixture of relief and terror wash over her. Relief because help was coming. Terror because she had no idea what kind of help the humans would provide. Their reputation for unconventional warfare was well documented, but mostly through rumors and second-hand accounts. The few direct conflicts humans had been involved in had ended quickly and decisively, usually with their opponents surrendering, rather than continuing to fight. But the details of those victories were classified by every government involved, as if they were too embarrassing or frightening to admit publicly. Now she would see firsthand what made the galaxy's other military powers so reluctant to engage human forces directly. Her empire's survival might depend on understanding and working with warriors whose methods her people had always considered barbaric. The communication console chimed again. This time it was a longer message with technical specifications, arrival, classrooms and coordination protocols. The humans weren't just coming, they were coming prepared, organized and ready to integrate with her existing forces. Virathea realized with growing amazement that they had already been planning for this scenario. The humans had been watching the Ravager invasion from the beginning, analyzing the enemy's tactics and preparing countermeasures. They had been waiting for her to ask. The first sign of the human fleet's arrival wasn't visual. It was the complete silence that fell over the Xelian bridge crew. Every sensor operator, communications officer and tactical analyst stopped what they were doing and stared at their displays with expressions of confusion and amazement. "Your Majesty," the sensor chief called out, his voice uncertain. "We're detecting something. Multiple contacts, but they're not showing up properly on our screens." Queen Virathea moved to the main display, watching as ghostly blips flickered in and out of existence at the edge of their sensor range. The contacts were there, definitely real, but somehow her advanced Xelian detection systems couldn't get a solid lock on them. Then, without warning, the human fleet simply appeared. One moment there was empty space at the system's edge. The next moment dozens of ships hung motionless against the stars. No flash of light, no energy discharge from faster-than-light engines, no sensor warning of incoming vessels. They had simply materialized like ghosts stepping out of shadows. "Commander." Kale whistled softly. "Stealth technology that advanced shouldn't be possible. Our sensors should have detected them light years away. The human ships were unlike anything Virathea had ever seen, where Xelian vessels were elegant and graceful, designed to inspire, draw and demonstrate the Empire's artistic achievements. These ships looked purely functional. No decorative elements, no ceremonial weapons, no gleaming hull plating to catch starlight. They were smaller than traditional galactic warships, but something about their design made the Xelian officers nervous. Every line, every angle, every visible component seemed designed for maximum efficiency. These weren't ships built to look impressive. They were tools, crafted by beings who understood exactly what they wanted those tools to do. "Incoming transmission," the communications officer announced. "Admiral Park requests permission to come aboard." Within an hour, the human admiral was stepping through the airlock of Virathea's flagship. She had expected someone older, more decorated, perhaps wearing the kind of elaborate uniform that galactic military commanders favored. Instead, Admiral Min-Ho Park looked barely 40 years old, dressed in simple military fatigues that could have belonged to any soldier in his fleet. No medals, no ceremonial weapons, no indicators of rank beyond a small insignia on his collar. He moved with quiet confidence, his eyes taking in everything around him with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to assessing tactical situations quickly. "Your Majesty," he said, with a slight bow that was respectful but not subservient. No flowery diplomatic language, no formal declarations of honor or allegiance, just a simple acknowledgement between two military commanders facing a common enemy. Behind him came his staff officers, equally unremarkable in appearance but carrying themselves with the same quiet professionalism. Commander Jinwoo Kim had cybernetic implants along his left arm that interfaced directly with a portable tactical display. Captain Soo-Jin Lee carried equipment that Virathea's military advisors couldn't immediately identify. "We've been watching this war," Park continued, moving directly to the main tactical display without waiting for formal introductions. His fingers danced across the controls with practiced ease, calling up information that shouldn't have been accessible to non-Xelian systems. The display shifted, showing Ravager movement patterns across multiple star systems. Park highlighted specific attack vectors, timing sequences, and resource allocation patterns that Virathea's own analysts had missed. The Ravagers are predictable once you understand their pattern, he explained, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. They consume, adapt, then consume more. Each victory makes them stronger, but it also makes them dependent on that strength. General Thane stepped forward, his traditional military training making him uncomfortable with Park's casual approach. Admiral, with respect, we've studied their patterns extensively. They adapt to every strategy we employ. Park glanced at him with what might have been amusement. You've been fighting them like they're a conventional enemy. Honor guards, formal battle lines, ceremonial challenges before engagement. They're not warriors, they're predators, and predators have never faced an enemy that refuses to play by galactic rules. He manipulated the display again, showing potential. Attack scenarios that made several Xelian officers gasp in surprise. The tactics were aggressive, unconventional, and completely ignored established military protocols. Your people fight with honor, Park said, looking directly at Verathea. That's admirable, but honor won't save your civilians from being consumed. Sometimes survival requires abandoning the rules and fighting dirty. Captain Lee stepped forward, activating her own equipment. We've identified 17 critical weaknesses in Ravager fleet coordination. Their strength comes from collective intelligence, but that also makes them vulnerable to specific types of disruption. Commander Kim's cybernetic arm interfaced with the ship's systems, displaying technical data that shouldn't have been compatible with human technology. Their bioships rely on neural networks for coordination, disrupt the network, and individual vessels become confused and ineffective. Verathea studied the human officers, beginning to understand why other galactic powers were so nervous about human military capabilities. These weren't just warriors, they were problem solvers who approached warfare like an engineering challenge. "What do you need from us?" she asked. Park smiled, and for the first time since the Ravager invasion began, Verathea felt genuinely hopeful. "Just stay out of our way until we teach you how to fight like humans." The briefing room fell dead silent when Captain Lee outlined her plan. Every Xelian officer stared at the tactical display in horror, unable to believe what they were hearing. The human captain stood calmly at the front of the room, pointing to a detailed hologram of Kepler Station, one of their outer mining facilities. "We evacuate all personnel except for a skeleton crew of volunteers," Lee explained, her voice matter-of-fact. "Then we rig the entire facility with explosives and broadcast a fake distress signal. When the Ravagers come to consume the station, we detonate everything." General Thane shot to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "That's barbaric. Kepler Station has been operational for over a century. It's a monument to Xelian engineering." "It's also bait," Lee replied without emotion. "The Ravagers have consumed 12 similar facilities in the past month. They expect us to defend it conventionally, which means they'll bring their standard assault formation. That makes them predictable." Commander Kim stepped forward, his cybernetic arm connecting wirelessly to the tactical display. "While they're focused on the station, my teams will infiltrate their command ships through quantum networks. The Ravagers think their bio-neural connections are secure, but they've never encountered human cyber warfare." Queen Verathea studied the plan carefully. Every instinct screamed against deliberately destroying their own infrastructure, but she forced herself to think logically. They had already lost dozens of stations to the Ravagers. At least this way, they might take some enemies with them. "How many Ravager ships will this destroy?" she asked. "Potentially none," Lee admitted, "but it will disrupt their command structure for the first time in this war. They'll realize they're fighting an enemy that doesn't follow the rules they've learned to exploit." The operation began 12 hours later. Verathea watched from her command ship as the last transport shuttles left Kepler Station. The volunteers who remained behind were all experienced military engineers, people who understood exactly what they were sacrificing. The Ravager response was swift and predictable. 3 bioships emerged from hyperspace, their organic hulls pulsing with absorbed energy from previous conquests. They moved toward the station in their typical formation, confident in their ability to overwhelm any defense. "Quantum infiltration teams are in position," Kim reported from his mobile command center. "Beginning network penetration now." On the main display, Verathea could see the Ravager ships beginning their consumption process. Tendrils of biomatter, extended from their hulls, reaching toward the station's power core. In minutes, they would begin breaking down the facility's structure and absorbing its resources. Detonation in 30 seconds, Lee announced calmly. The explosion was unlike anything Virathea had ever witnessed. The entire station disappeared in a ball of white-hot plasma that engulfed all 3 Ravager ships. But even more shocking was what happened next. The enemy vessels began firing on each other, their coordination completely broken. Network infiltration successful, Kim reported, with satisfaction. Their command structure is in chaos. Individual ships are reverting to basic survival instincts. Within minutes, the Ravager formation had completely collapsed. Ships that had operated with perfect coordination were now attacking anything that moved, including their own allies. The humans had turned the enemy's greatest strength into a devastating weakness. But the real shock came when Virathea saw the combat footage from the boarding actions. Human Marines had somehow infiltrated the damaged Ravager ships, fighting through corridors of living tissue and biomechanical systems. She watched in stunned amazement as soldiers moved with cold efficiency, using weapons and tactics she had never imagined. Where Xelian warriors relied on energy shields and formal combat techniques, humans used whatever worked. Explosives placed in vital organ systems, ambush tactics that struck from unexpected angles, weapons that seemed designed to cause maximum damage to organic targets. "They're not even trying to capture the ships," one of her advisors whispered in disgust. "They're just destroying everything." Virathea found herself mesmerized by the tactical feeds. The human Marines moved through the enemy vessels like they had been born for this kind of warfare. No hesitation, no mercy, no concern for the conventional rules of engagement that had governed galactic conflicts for centuries. "They fight like the Ravagers," another advisor muttered, his voice filled with revulsion. "No," Virathea corrected, unable to look away from the displays. "They fight to win." The difference was becoming clear to her. The Ravagers fought with instinct and overwhelming force, consuming everything in their path. But the humans fought with intelligence and adaptability, using the enemy's own nature against them. Admiral Park joined her at the tactical display, watching as the last Ravager ship was systematically destroyed. "Your Majesty, this is just the beginning. We've learned their weaknesses, but they'll adapt to our tactics eventually. The next phase will require your people to abandon some of their traditional approaches." "What do you mean?" she asked. "We need to teach your soldiers to fight like humans," Park replied. "No more honor guards, no more ceremonial formations, no more giving the enemy time to prepare. Just efficient, effective warfare focused on protecting your people." Virathea looked around the briefing room at her military advisors. Many of them appeared horrified by what they had witnessed, but she could see calculation in their eyes as well. They were beginning to understand that survival might require abandoning the traditions that had defined their military for generations. "How long will it take?" she asked. Park smiled grimly. "Your people are quick learners. Give us a week and we'll have your forces thinking like humans. Give us a month, and the Ravagers will wish they had never encountered the Xelian Empire." The transformation began quietly, almost unnoticed at first. Lieutenant Jaya was the first to request a transfer, asking to serve directly under Captain Lee's command instead of her traditional Xelian unit. Within days, dozens of other young officers were making similar requests, much to the horror of their senior commanders. "It's unprecedented," General Thane complained during the morning briefing. "These soldiers are abandoning their heritage, their training, everything that makes them proper Xelian warriors." Queen Virathea watched the training exercises through the observation windows, seeing her people learning to fight in ways that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. Xelian soldiers were practicing ambush tactics, learning to use human-designed weapons, and most shocking of all, abandoning the formal combat formations that had been the foundation of their military doctrine for over 1,000 years. "Look at them," she murmured to Admiral Park, who stood beside her watching the same scene. "They're moving differently, thinking differently." Park nodded approvingly. "Your people are natural adapters. Most galactic species get locked into rigid thinking patterns, but Xelians have flexibility. They just needed someone to show them it was okay to break the rules." On the training ground below, Commander Kim was working directly with Xelian engineers. his cybernetic arm interfacing with their energy weapon systems. The results were extraordinary, hybrid weapons that combined human tactical efficiency with Xelian energy technology, creating tools of war that neither species could have developed alone. The first field test of these new weapons came during the defense of the Altair system. Instead of meeting the Ravager attack with traditional battle lines, the joint forces used human-style tactics that left the enemy completely confused. Small teams of mixed human and Xelian soldiers struck at Ravager ships from multiple angles, using stealth approaches that avoided direct confrontation. When the enemy tried to adapt their consumption patterns to counter these tactics, they found their targets had already moved to new positions. They're learning faster than we expected. Captain Lee reported from the field. The Xelians have excellent technical skills, and once they understand that survival matters more than protocol, they become incredibly effective. Verathea found herself spending more and more time working directly with the human command staff. The formal diplomatic protocols she had always relied on gradually gave way to practical discussions about strategy and tactics. Admiral Park treated her not as a foreign dignitary, but as a fellow military commander facing a common threat. "Your traditional approach to warfare is beautiful," Park told her during one of their planning sessions. "All that ceremony and honor, it represents something noble about your species. But the Ravagers don't care about nobility. They only understand strength and efficiency." She was beginning to see the difference in their philosophies. Xelian military tradition was built around concepts of honor, glory, and demonstrating cultural superiority through combat. Human warfare was something entirely different, a tool focused solely on protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. "We fight to prove we're worthy," she realized aloud. "You fight because someone has to." CD. Change in mindset was spreading through her military, faster than anyone had anticipated. Young Xelian officers were questioning orders that seemed inefficient, suggesting tactical modifications based on human principles, and most surprisingly, achieving better results than their traditional units. Commander Kim's technical innovations were particularly impressive. His cybernetic enhancements allowed him to interface directly with Xelian computer systems, creating hybrid technologies that combined the best of both species' capabilities. Energy weapons with human targeting systems, defensive shields that could adapt in real time to enemy attacks, and communication networks that coordinated forces with unprecedented precision. The Ravagers were beginning to struggle against these new tactics. For the first time since the invasion began, they were facing an enemy that adapted faster than they could consume and integrate new defenses. Their biological advantages meant nothing against opponents who refused to fight predictably. "The enemy is showing signs of confusion," Kim reported during a strategy meeting. "Their attack patterns are becoming erratic. They're trying to adapt to our tactics, but we're changing too fast for their biological systems to keep up." Verathea studied the tactical displays, seeing patterns she had never noticed before. The human approach to warfare was like watching a master craftsman at work. Every move served a specific purpose. Nothing was wasted on ceremony or display, and the results spoke for themselves. Her own people were becoming something new, something that combined Xelian technical expertise with human practical efficiency. The young officers who had requested transfers were now teaching these new methods to their former units, spreading the knowledge throughout the military. "Are we losing our identity?" she asked Park one evening, watching mixed human Xelian units train together with seamless coordination. "You're finding a new one," he replied, "one that's strong enough to survive what's coming. Your culture, your history, your values, none of that has to change. But your approach to protecting those things can evolve." The war was far from over, but for the first time since the Ravager invasion began, Verathea felt confident about her people's chances. They were learning to fight like humans, while remaining distinctly Xelian, creating something that was stronger than either species could achieve alone. The war room buzzed with nervous energy as Captain Lee unveiled the most ambitious plan anyone had ever heard. Holographic displays showed the Ravager home fleet, dozens of massive bioships clustered around their mobile command center, a creature so large it could have been mistaken for a small moon. "We're not going to try to match their firepower," Lee announced to the assembled commanders. That's exactly what they expect. Instead, we're going to do something they've never encountered. Coordinated swarm tactics using the smallest, fastest ships in our combined fleets. General Thane shook his head in disbelief. Those ships are massive. Our fighters will be like insects attacking elephants. Exactly, Lee smiled. And insects can bring down elephants if they know where to sting. The plan was unlike anything in galactic military history. Instead of traditional battle formations, they would deploy hundreds of small craft in coordinated waves, each targeting specific neural network nodes that Commander Kim had identified in the Ravager bioships. Disrupt enough nodes, and the massive vessels would lose their ability to coordinate attacks. Queen Verathea studied the tactical projections, feeling a mixture of excitement and terror. Captain, this plan requires precise timing and coordination. One mistake could result in catastrophic losses. Your Majesty, Admiral Park interjected, every plan involves risk. The question is whether we're willing to accept small risks to avoid total defeat. As the joint fleet moved toward the Ravager home system, Verathea made a decision that shocked her entire command staff. She would personally pilot one of the modified Xalian fighters, flying alongside human pilots in the most dangerous phase of the assault. Your Majesty, this is madness, Commander Kyle protested. A queen's place is on the command ship, not in a fighter cockpit. A queen's place is wherever her people need her most, Verathea replied, checking the controls of her modified fighter. The human technicians had installed tactical systems that felt alien under her hands, but she was beginning to understand their brutal efficiency. The assault began at dawn, ship's time. Hundreds of small craft launched simultaneously from the combined fleet, their movements choreographed with precision that would have been impossible under traditional command structures. Human pilots flew alongside Xalian warriors, their communications chatter a mixture of tactical updates and encouragement. Verathea found herself flying wing position to Lieutenant Han, a human pilot barely half her age, who moved his fighter like it was an extension of his own body. The experience was terrifying and exhilarating, nothing like the ceremonial flights she had trained for as part of her royal duties. Ravager fighters incoming, Han's voice crackled through her headset. Stay close, Your Majesty. This is about to get interesting. The enemy response was swift and overwhelming. Biofighters swarmed toward the attacking formation, their organic hulls pulsing with absorbed energy. But instead of meeting them in traditional dogfights, the human Xalian forces scattered into seemingly random patterns that confused the Ravager pilots. Neural network nodes are marked on your tactical display. Commander Kim's voice reached them through the quantum communication network. Hit them fast and get out. Don't try to fight their main weapons. Verathea followed Han's lead as they dove toward one of the massive bioships, their fighters moving in coordinated spirals that made them difficult targets. The Ravager vessel's surface was covered with organic weapon systems, but the neural nodes Kim had identified were poorly defended. The enemy had never imagined anyone would target their coordination systems directly. Her fighters' modified weapons systems locked onto the target, energy beams precisely calibrated to disrupt bioneural networks. The shots looked almost insignificant against the massive ship's hull, but the effect was immediate. Sections of the vessel began to twitch and convulse as their coordination systems failed. Direct hit on Neural Cluster 7, she reported, feeling a rush of satisfaction as the target area went dark. Around her, dozens of other small craft were executing similar attacks with surgical precision. The massive Ravager ships began to show signs of confusion, their weapons firing randomly instead of in coordinated volleys. Your Majesty, Admiral Park's voice crackled through the communications, and she could hear the satisfaction in his tone. Welcome to human-style warfare. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to save your people. The tide of battle was turning in ways no one had expected. The Ravager fleet, suddenly unable to coordinate their attacks, found themselves facing an enemy that struck like a swarm of angry insects, too small to hit effectively, too numerous to ignore, and hitting exactly where it hurt most. Verathea pulled her fighter into a sharp turn, following Han toward their next target. Her hands were steady on the controls now, her royal training forgotten in favor of practical efficiency. She was no longer a ceremonial figure watching battles from a safe distance. She was a warrior, fighting for her people's survival. The largest Ravager bioship began to list as its coordination systems failed completely. Weapons systems that had operated in perfect harmony for centuries were now firing on their own vessels, creating chaos throughout the enemy formation. "All squadrons continue the assault," Captain Lee's voice reached every pilot. "They're breaking apart. Keep hitting those neural networks." For the first time since the war began, Virathea allowed herself to hope that they might actually win. The intelligence briefing changed everything. Commander Yuki's reconnaissance team had spent 3 weeks tracking Ravager communication patterns, following quantum signatures through hyperspace until they discovered something that made everyone in the war room fall silent. "The Queen ship," Yuki announced, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just another biovessel. It's the central nervous system for their entire species." The holographic display showed a creature that defied comprehension. A living ship, the size of a small planet, its organic hull pulsing with neural networks that stretched across thousands of kilometers. Biomechanical tendrils extended in all directions, each one capable of coordinating millions of Ravager drones across multiple star systems. "Every Ravager we've fought is connected to this thing," Kim explained, his cybernetic arm interfacing with the tactical display. "It's not commanding them, it is them. Cut the connection and their entire species becomes nothing more than mindless animals." Admiral Park studied the readings carefully, his expression growing more serious with each detail. The Queen ship was protected by the largest concentration of Ravager forces they had ever encountered. Hundreds of biovessels arranged in defensive formations that could destroy entire fleets. "Direct assault is impossible," General Thane stated. "Flatly, we'd need 10 times our current forces just to reach the outer perimeter, which is why we're not going to try," Park replied calmly. "In human military history, we call this cutting off the head of the snake. Sometimes the most direct approach is the most effective." The plan he outlined was audacious beyond belief. A small infiltration team would use stealth technology to penetrate the Queen ship's defenses, while the main fleet provided a diversionary assault on the perimeter forces. Once inside, they would target the central neural core that controlled the entire Ravager network. "It's a suicide mission, Commander," Cale said bluntly. "Even if the infiltration team succeeds, they'll never make it out alive." "Maybe," Park acknowledged, "but if we don't try, billions of people across the galaxy will die anyway. At least this way their sacrifice will mean something." Kim stepped forward, his cybernetic enhancements glowing softly in the dim briefing room. "I can interface directly with their bio-neural systems. My implants are designed to disrupt organic networks. I just need to get close enough to the core." Captain Lee activated her tactical display, showing the external assault plan. "My squadrons will hit every defensive position simultaneously. We'll make enough noise to keep their attention focused outward, while the infiltration team gets through." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. This wasn't just another battle. It was potentially the final confrontation of the war. Success would mean the end of the Ravager threat forever. Failure would mean the extinction of multiple civilizations. "I'm going with the infiltration team," Queen Virathea announced quietly. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Every military advisor in the room began speaking at once, their voices rising in protest and disbelief. General Thane looked like he might actually faint, while Commander Cale started listing protocol violations. "Your Majesty," Admiral Park said firmly, "this mission requires specialized training and cybernetic augmentation. It's not appropriate for a queen," Virathea interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had ruled an empire for 20 years. "Admiral, I've been flying combat missions alongside your pilots for weeks. I've learned your tactics, used your weapons, and fought your kind of war. If this is truly the final battle, then I will not watch it from a safe distance." Park studied her carefully, seeing something in her expression that made him reconsider his objections. The Queen who had first contacted them for help had been desperate and uncertain. The woman standing before him now was a warrior who had earned her place through action, not birthright. "The infiltration will be brutal," he warned. "Inside that ship, we'll be fighting through organic corridors filled with defensive systems we can barely imagine. There will be no time for hesitation, no opportunity for second chances." "Then I'll fit right in," Verathea replied with a smile that reminded everyone why her people had followed her into this war. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you humans don't have all the fun." Commander Kim nodded approvingly. "Actually, Your Majesty might be useful. Xalian energy manipulation abilities could help us navigate the bio-neural networks. And if we're really cutting off the head of the snake, having a queen present sends a message." The final preparations took 12 hours. Verathea found herself in the armory, learning to use weapons designed for close-quarters combat inside organic structures. The equipment felt strange and brutal compared to traditional Xalian arms, but she was beginning to understand that effectiveness mattered more than elegance. "Remember," Park told the infiltration team as they prepared to board their stealth transport, "we get one chance at this. Once we're inside, there's no backup plan, no cavalry coming to rescue us. We either succeed or we die trying." Verathea checked her weapon one final time, feeling a calm determination settle over her. This was what leadership really meant. Not issuing orders from a safe command ship, but standing beside your people when everything was on the line. "Let's go kill a queen," she said quietly, and meant every word. The stealth transport shuddered as it penetrated the queen ship's outer hull, cutting through layers of organic armor that tried to heal around the breach. Verathea felt her stomach lurch as they passed through what could only be described as a membrane. The ship wasn't just alive, it was a single massive organism. "Atmospheric readings are stable," Commander Kim reported, his cybernetic arm already interfacing with the ship's biosystems. "But the air tastes wrong. Everything in here is designed to support Ravager physiology." The infiltration team moved cautiously through the entry point, their boots squelching on surfaces that felt uncomfortably warm and soft. The corridors weren't built. They had grown, following organic patterns that made navigation confusing and disorienting. "Stay close," Admiral Park whispered, his weapon scanning the pulsing walls around them. In human military experience, living ships usually have immune systems. We're probably being analyzed right now. As if summoned by his words, the walls began to change. Organic growths emerged from the surfaces, reaching toward the intruders with grasping tendrils. The team's weapons fired in unison, energy beams cutting through the defensive systems, but the ship responded by bleeding, actual blood that hissed and steamed where it hit their equipment. Verathea fought down a wave of nausea as they pushed deeper into the ship. The human Marines moved with practiced efficiency, their movements coordinated in ways that suggested they had trained for exactly this type of mission. They didn't waste energy on unnecessary actions, didn't hesitate when confronted with horrifying sights, and never stopped moving forward. "Neural junction ahead," Kim announced, his cybernetic implants glowing brighter as they interfaced with the ship's systems. "I can tap into their communication network from here." The junction was a chamber filled with biomechanical computers, organic processing units that pulsed with data flowing throughout the ship. Kim connected directly to the systems, his face contorting with concentration as alien information flooded his augmented nervous system. "I can see their command structure," he reported through gritted teeth. "The Queen is 3 levels deeper in the central chamber, but there are thousands of defensive organisms between us and her." The journey deeper into the ship became increasingly nightmarish. They fought through corridors that constricted around them, past chambers filled with organic machinery that served purposes they couldn't understand. The walls themselves seemed to watch their progress, biomechanical eyes tracking their movements. Verathea found herself fighting alongside Sergeant Minjun, a human Marine who moved through the organic horrors with the calm efficiency of someone who had seen worse things. His weapon never seemed to run out of ammunition, and he had an uncanny ability to predict where the next attack would come from. "How do you do this?" she asked during a brief pause in the fighting. "How do you stay calm in a place like this?" Minjun smiled grimly, reloading his weapon with practiced motions. "Your Majesty, humans have been fighting monsters since before we had fire. This is just another monster in another place. The principle is the same. You keep moving, keep fighting, and never give up." The central chamber was vast beyond imagination, a cathedral-sized space filled with neural networks that pulsed with the rhythm of a massive heartbeat. At the center of it all was the Queen, not a creature in any recognizable sense, but a living computer the size of a building, her organic mass connected to countless biomechanical systems. "She's beautiful and terrible at the same time," Verathea whispered, staring at the alien intelligence that had orchestrated the destruction of entire star systems. Kim stepped forward, his cybernetic arm extending toward the Queen's neural networks. "I can upload the virus directly into her core systems, but I need time. Once I start, every defensive system in this ship will try to kill us." "Then we give you time," Park said simply, positioning his team around the chamber's entrances. The moment Kim made contact, the Queen ship convulsed around them. Organic walls writhed in agony. Biomechanical systems sparked and failed, and a psychic scream that seemed to come from the ship itself echoed through the corridors. But more than that, the scream reached across space itself. Through the quantum communication networks, Verathea could hear reports from the battle outside. Every Ravager ship in the fleet was convulsing, their coordination systems failing as their Queen's pain transmitted through their collective consciousness. "It's working!" Kim shouted over the chaos, his cybernetic implants glowing white-hot as he forced the virus deeper into the Queen's neural networks. "But she's fighting back. Her immune systems are trying to purge the infection." The chamber, filled with defensive organisms, creatures that emerged from the walls like antibodies, responding to an infection. The human Marines fought with desperate efficiency, their weapons cutting down wave after wave of attackers, while Kim continued his work. Verathea found herself back-to-back with Admiral Park, both of them firing at targets that seemed to multiply faster than they could be destroyed. She understood now what made humans such effective warriors. They didn't fight for abstract concepts like honor or glory. They fought with the desperate efficiency of a species that had survived by refusing to give up, no matter how hopeless. The situation appeared. "Upload complete," Kim announced, collapsing as his cybernetic systems overloaded. "The virus is spreading through her entire network. Every Ravager connected to her is being affected." The Queen's death scream shattered reality itself, a psychic wave that reached across the galaxy and severed the neural connections that had bound the Ravager species together for millennia. 6 months after the Queen ship's destruction, Queen Verathea stood in the observation lounge of her newly constructed flagship, watching the final Ravager vessels disappear into the void between galaxies. These weren't the coordinated fleets that had terrorized the galaxy for years. They were broken, confused creatures fleeing like wounded animals back to whatever dark corners of space had spawned them. The ship around her was different from the elegant vessels that had once represented Xelian naval power. Built with human engineering principles and Xelian technology, it was functional rather than beautiful, designed for effectiveness rather than ceremony. The bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, their movements reflecting months of training, under human military advisors. "Hard to believe it's really over," Commander Kale said, joining her at the massive viewing window. His own appearance had changed. Gone were the ornate dress uniforms of traditional Xelian officers, replaced by practical combat gear that bore the scars of real warfare. The transformation hadn't been limited to military equipment. Across Xelian space, entire worlds were rebuilding using hybrid technologies that combined the best innovations from both species. Cities rose with human-designed defensive systems integrated into Xelian architectural beauty. Manufacturing centers produced weapons and equipment that neither species could have created alone. Admiral Park approached from the bridge, carrying a data pad filled with reports from across the galaxy. The human admiral looked tired but satisfied, his simple uniform somehow more impressive than any ceremonial dress Verathea had ever seen. "Your Majesty?" he said with the casual respect that had replaced their initial formal interactions. "The Galactic Council is requesting a full briefing on human military capabilities. I think they're finally taking us seriously." Verathea smiled, remembering her first desperate message to Earth 6 months ago. The proud queen who had reluctantly asked barbarians for help seemed like a different person now. "Good. It's time." The galaxy learned that survival isn't about following rules. It's about adapting to whatever threatens your people. The communication console chimed with incoming messages from across known space. The Crimson Republic was requesting human tactical advisors for their border conflicts. The Merchant Federation wanted to discuss joint defense agreements. Even the isolationist crystalline communes were asking about human military philosophy. "Look at this," Park said, scrolling through the requests. "The Andromedans want to know if we can teach their forces asymmetric warfare principles. The Spiral Confederation is asking about non-conventional tactical integration. They're all trying to learn how to fight like humans without admitting that's what they're doing." Captain Lee entered the lounge, her own datapad showing deployment schedules for human advisory teams. The young officer who had once horrified Xelian commanders with her willingness to sacrifice infrastructure for tactical advantage was now one of the most requested military instructors in the galaxy. "The interesting thing," Lee observed, "is how quickly other species adapt once they understand the principles. The Altarians have completely restructured their military doctrine. The Centauri Defense Force is achieving better results than they've had in decades." Virathea watched the starfields beyond the window, thinking about how much had changed since the war began. Her own people had transformed from ceremonial warriors into practical fighters, who understood that protecting civilians mattered more than maintaining traditions. "Commander Kim sends his regards," Park continued, reading from his reports. "His cybernetic integration program is being implemented across 12 different star systems. Apparently, other species are very interested in human-style augmentation technology. The alliance between humans and Xelians had grown into something neither species had expected when the first desperate messages crossed space. What had begun as a military partnership had evolved into genuine friendship, built through shared struggle and mutual respect. Young Xelian officers served aboard human ships, learning command principles that emphasized adaptability over rigid hierarchy. Human technicians worked alongside Xelian engineers, creating innovations that pushed the boundaries of what either species thought possible. "There's something else," Park said, his tone becoming more serious. "Earth Command wants to establish a permanent joint military academy. They're calling it the Interspecies Defense Initiative. The idea is to train officers from multiple worlds in integrated combat doctrine." Virathea nodded approvingly. "Where would they build it?" "They're suggesting neutral space, somewhere all species can access easily. But they want joint leadership, human tactical expertise combined with Xelian technological knowledge." The idea felt right to Virathea. The old galaxy, with its rigid hierarchies and ceremonial warfare, had nearly been destroyed by an enemy that refused to follow the established rules. The new galaxy emerging from the ashes would need defenders who understood that survival required flexibility, innovation, and the willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect the innocent. "Admiral," she said finally, "I think the galaxy is ready for a new kind of peace, one maintained not by diplomacy and protocol, but by people who understand that freedom is worth fighting for." Park smiled, looking out at the stars with the satisfaction of someone who had helped reshape the future. "Your Majesty, I think you're right. The age of human influence in galactic affairs has begun, not through conquest, but through the simple principle that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you fight to protect others." Earth's flag now flew alongside dozens of others throughout known space, representing not domination but partnership in the endless task of keeping the galaxy safe for all who called it home.